we're going to get this thing going. And since this is a student-centered event, we'd like to feature one of our own to get us started. Tiffany, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiffany Anderson, and I am a senior sport management major here at UT, and I am originally from Dallas, Texas, and I am here representing UT's first ever sport management club, and I am also here to introduce our second panel and introduce our moderator for that panel. Our second panel is called Innovation in the Future of the Sport Industry. And our moderator for this panel is Mr. Jim Rooney. He's a business owner, consultant, speaker, and author. Mr. Rooney is also a co-organizer for the Long Game Symposium, and we at UT are very grateful for the time and energy he has dedicated to make this event so extraordinary. And we also like to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to join us today. So without further ado, Mr. Rooney.
Tiffany, thank you so much. I've got to lecture to you in class a couple of times. It's great to see your leadership and your continued commitment to both the industry as well as this project. So thank you. Today we're going to do, as Tiffany said, panel on the innovation and the future of the industry. A lot of the conversation in the COVID panel was about sort of next steps, and we're really going to try and have a conversation that drives further in the future, 5, 10, 15 years down the line. What will this future look like? So I have a fantastic group of panelists with me today. Their bios have been available throughout the registration process, so I'm not going to go into a deep dive into the bios. I'm waiting for Dan Slater to get on the screen here. There we go. So we have Dan Slater from Amazon AWS. Dan has been a friend of mine, and we've worked on a couple great projects together. Larry Miller from Nike and the Jordan brand, and we're so happy to have Larry with us. Larry, thank you. Jeff Miller from the NFL, who I've known for many, many years and who has worn many hats in the NFL. Currently, he's running our communications efforts, but prior to that, he really led some of the most important technology development efforts in the league's history. And Raquel Garcia. Raquel, we're so glad to see you. Austin FC, a brand that hasn't even had a game yet. So we're 5 days away from kickoff. So what a great opportunity to talk about launching something new. So folks, welcome and thank you. This is a panel about innovation, and I already did something dumb, and that was, I spent 2.5 years writing a book with Judy Batista that's right behind me, and I know Judy's smarter than me and better on camera than me, and I put her ahead of me in terms of a moderator. So that was a dumb way to start off here. But let me start with this conversation as I've talked to folks, with a background. I want to try and keep the initial conversation broad, and then sort of bring our focus, more into maybe some specifics. But I look at the sports industry as doing a couple of things, but two really major things of why we exist is, one, we let people live vicariously through someone else's skill, i.e. the athlete. And then second, we create community, rooting for a specific team or a contestant within an event. Fan bases are communities, and technology and innovation are going to have a massive impact on both of those conditions. First, we're flattening the world, so communities are getting closer. We're going to be able to build larger, broader, and greater affinity with our fan bases than in many ways we ever thought were possible. And then the second, this idea of making the athlete, bringing a level of intimacy that, again, was sort of beyond imagination, now is very much within the realm of possibility. So creating this more personal experience between the fan and what's happening on the field, if you will, is going to happen in so many significant and meaningful ways. Dan, I want to start the conversation with you because Amazon has such a big impact on all of our lives. And I want to talk about this idea of building community, and for us to get to these communities, data throughput is going to be such a big issue, and how we, build these more robust tools that allow us to have greater access, go across the globe in a broader format, and connect before, during, and after games in ways that become so much more meaningful. Can you talk about where AWS, Amazon are in terms of approaching that idea of building community within sports?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be part of this esteemed panel. It's a real honor. And I think you're right in terms of, thinking through how really technology has impacted sports, driving the innovation and driving that community. I think a lot of that does come back to just how the data behind it really is being leveraged to drive tighter connections between the communities that you mentioned, the fans of certain teams or fans of a sport, or even just how data is being used to personalize an experience for a fan. I think that as we think through what is the things that drive really the technology, it's the data behind it, and sports luckily is one of those things that's really data and statistics heavy. You have historical box scores and statistics going back decades, if not centuries, of gameplay. And now, based off of what technology enables you to do, you're now able to collect any number of data points in real time, from a game or from a real situation, and leverage that in ways that is really going to surprise and delight the fans of the sport. What you can do with that, driving analytical insights, for teams in terms of tendencies and in-game decisions, using it to train kind of machine learning models, artificial intelligence technology to then really generate those instant statistics or deeper and more cross-connected analytics, better identifying trends, and just provide overall a more immersive and personalized experience for fans. I think that alone, helps with that connecting communities, driving a great experience for fans, and certainly, driving more technological advancements on behalf of those who, play and manage sports.
And I think, Dan, let me stay with that for one more to talk about this personal side. You and I went through this imagining exercise, if you will. We talked about the idea of maybe some type of VR experience where a running back is running through the line of scrimmage. AI and so many of the tools that you folks are creating, partnering with, developing, are going to drive those types of things. What do you see? Can you estimate maybe the distance between where we are and something like that? We have those experience in esports. In terms of bringing that to reality with a live game, what is your estimation of what that's going to look like when we might get there?
I think, no one has a crystal ball, so it's hard to kind of imagine what the future has. Like even just 10 years ago, thinking through things like RFID tags on, players' jerseys or as part of the actual equipment were unimaginable. I think in terms of like thinking where it's going, I think it's always going to be led by, what are the problems and challenges that leagues and teams and athletes have, and really helping solve that. And specifically in terms of, the fan experience, really just thinking through what are the things that are going to surprise and delight fans and go, beyond just providing technology. I know that AWS, we try to go beyond just being a cloud provider. We work hand in hand with organizations like the NFL to bring, better fan experiences, that more immersive experience of engaging and enhancing the connection to the sports they love. Like just as an example, AWS helped the NFL develop solutions for NFL Next Gen Stats. And this was born directly out of fans demanding an increased depth of analysis and context and content behind the game. So working with partners with NFL, we want to constantly strive to surpass fans' expectations. I think we'll constantly be driven by that, and where we go from that is definitely going to be informed by, again, what are fans going to want? What makes for a better and a more immersive experience for them? What is going to help leagues, teams, athletes solve their problems and work backwards from there.
Yep. That as we talked about, I think it's just exciting to me to talk to Jeff Miller, to talk to you and hear about, where we are on that cusp. Larry, let me turn to Nike and get back a little bit into this conversation about that affinity. You folks have dominated the footwear, the apparel and the sports equipment industry for really the last 50 years. And you've done it by taking this desire of living vicariously through an athlete and building a company and a brand out of it. We all want to be like Mike, but every season you need to deliver new products. You need to have better equipment. You have to rejuvenate this customer experience. What are some of the core principles that allow you folks to constantly innovate while maintaining the stable and consistent leadership presence in the market?
Well, I think, to pick up on what Dan stated earlier, I think data is really playing a big role for us now, much bigger role than it used to in terms of developing product, in terms of connecting with consumers and really getting more insights and understanding of who our consumers are, what it is they want, what their purchasing habits are, those kinds of things. And that all has, I think, helped us to stay in our position in the industry. Even coming into the situation that we've been dealing with the pandemic, I think, Nike started 4 or 5 years ago, this whole idea of direct to consumer, learning as much as you could about the consumer, understanding. So when COVID hit, I won't say Nike was ready for it, but I think we were in a pretty good position to be able to continue to do business with our consumers and to continue to stay connected to our consumers. And again, I think data collection and data analysis is critical, and it's done an incredible job for us in terms of, again, like I said, understanding consumers, understanding what they want, how we can connect with them better. I think one of the things that this pandemic has shown me or taught me is that we can't, and Dan said it, we can't prepare for the unexpected. And this was something that nobody saw coming. Nobody, anticipated we'd be in this situation today. So we had to react. And I think, watching how the leagues reacted, watching how, different companies reacted, I think that to me is one of the things that shows how we're going to continue to move forward into the future. Because when these unexpected events occur, we have to figure out how to deal with them. And, it's the old adage of, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I think we're going to come out of this situation stronger in a lot of ways. I think there are a lot of things that companies are learning, that leagues are learning, that we're going to be able to take forward, and I think that are going to benefit us into the future. Again, and things that we probably wouldn't have thought about or wouldn't have dealt with or wouldn't have considered if this situation hadn't occurred and forced us to look at some of these things. So, from our perspective, again, it's been a situation of continuing to learn as much as we can about our consumers and continue to service them as best we possibly can in this situation. And I think, like I said, we've learned a lot, and a lot of those learnings will definitely help us moving forward.
Is there any specific concern you have about a technology trend that, other companies grew up over the last couple of years, and is there something that you see, as a major challenge that you wouldn't have seen 5, 10, 15 years ago as a challenge to you?
Well, I think, for our consumers, a lot of cases, they want to touch the product. They want to, there's a community there. It used to be that community was line up in front of the store and wait for our launch. And, people would, be scrambling to get these shoes. And I think, we've learned now that still exists to a certain extent. And one of the concerns is not to leave that consumer behind. That's been one of the concerns we've had. Is like, there's a consumer base that buys our product, that wants to stand in line and wants to be the first to have our product. And we just want to make sure that, we don't somehow leave that consumer behind as we're focusing on digital and direct to consumer through a digital effort.
That's great to hear. You know, my father always had his Nike shoes on because of our great partnership. And, you know, he always wanted the heaviest shoes. And at the end of his life, he'd shuffle around, but he'd always feel those Nike shoes. He had to make sure they felt strong before he would accept that pair of shoes from the locker room. So that's definitely experience out there for you. So Jeff, let me turn to you. You know, what are some of the benefits for the NFL in providing this greater access to players? Do you believe it'll actually help you build communities and build the fan base of the NFL?
Yeah, I think that whether we want to do it or not, in terms of sharing more of who we are with the fans, I think the culture's changed to the point where the demand exists. You know, Dan talked about a lot of the issues that data can address or problems that it can solve. I think one of the things that changes the nature of our fans is the fact that there is so much that they couldn't have done 10 or 15 years ago, and that has changed their behaviors. I mean, if you talk about, 10, 15 years ago, we talked about avid fans and casual fans. The avid fans were the ones that raised their hands and showed up at the games. The casual fans were everybody else. Now we know who those avid fans are. We know what it means to them. We know how they engage with us, whether it be in a retail operation like our NFL.shop, or whether it be by playing Madden, or whether it by playing fantasy football through NFL.com or any of our other partners. It's an incredible amount of information that they're willing to share and engage with us on, and therefore demanding reciprocity in exchange for access to players in ways that sate their appetite for as much NFL football as they can get. I think that part is endless. I mean, we talked for a moment, as a good example maybe, about next generation stats. You know, it wasn't but a couple of years ago that we put chips in players' shoulder pads to measure their velocities, their speeds when they were running down the field. And yeah, it was a fan engagement point. And that fan engagement point, showed them a little bit about separation from the defender, showed a little bit about how far they're running, showed a little bit about the distance with the quarterback through the ball and at what speeds. And it's surprising that something that seems as basic as that now is a huge interest of fans. And I don't know what the next generation of that is going to be. I'm sure that'll be something. We're working on applications using some of that data now. But all of that brings the game a little bit closer to the fan and the player a little bit closer to the fan, inch by inch, yard by yard, I think is a fantastic fan engagement tool. And not only does it engage that avid fan, but I think it changes some of the more passive fans, into avid fans. You can come casual to avid by getting interested in the game in different ways. And I think we've seen some of that.
Can we, I mean, is there a concern that is shared in the offices related to going too far? Can something become too personal, where we're too involved in the players' lives? The idea of voyeurism or even stalking. Are those concerns out there, and what are some of the conversations on that level?
Well, sure. I mean, at the broadest level, of course, we're want to make sure that our players are safe, and that being public figures is also in a protected environment. But it's interesting to watch fans engage with different elements about who the player population are outside of the game. Shows like Hard Knocks to take you behind the scenes of training camp, or celebrity type fashion or culture or style shows that involve our players and their activities in those places get incredible followings, not to mention all the social media stuff that any professional athlete does to build his or her own brand. So I think it's a different world than it was a few years ago. And part of participation in sports at that level is the celebrity basis too. That's unavoidable, and I think many athletes engage in. Are there risks associated with it? Sure, of course there are, but that's a different generation who engages and deals with those in different ways.
Well, Juju Smith-Schuster, one of our great receivers, has built a brand, I think, bigger than his receiver persona, through social media and some of the video gaming world that he's such a big part of.
Well, Jim, you always cite the guys that re-sign with the Steelers, so
Well, let me ask you another question about the ability and maybe a little bit of a shadow side. we're going to be able to, we already really started this year in COVID to get on the bench a little bit. And if we get more so like that, is there a concern about, us getting so into the inner workings of one team that it's going to give a competitive advantage to an opponent?
Inner workings of a team, how? Give me a little bit more.
Well, do you start hearing things on the sidelines that
sure.
go beyond just, and one, every fan would love to do that, but so would, I'd love to hear what the other team's saying in a way that I'm not accused of cheating for doing.
It's not an academic question. We had a case season before the COVID season, of a player on the sideline. It's a Sunday night game or a Monday night game, I forget which.
Yep.
And he had the microphone, his quarterback had a microphone on, and he said, "I'm seeing ghosts," which is a football term, right? He didn't know what he was seeing, or he didn't trust his eyes when he was throwing the ball. And that stuff is supposed to be filtered, by the way, for this group. It's supposed to be filtered out, because nothing that we do on field is meant to embarrass anybody, right? And a situation like that got some legs of its own, and it embarrassed the individual. And that's nobody's intent. And so there are all sorts of watchwords and filtering systems and such to sort of keep that sort of thing from happening. Not to mention, competitive reasons, because if that's on broadcast, certainly the other team is more than capable of seeing it and feeling a little bit, emboldened if they're blitzing or attacking that quarterback. So there is a lot of that. There's a lot of the competition stuff. But I find interesting, and let me take it a layer deeper maybe. We had long conversations, Jim, as you know, at the league level about, sorry, you might hear New York City outside my window here. We had long conversations at the league level about some of the sharing of data that we collect from next gen stats and from some of the sensors. How fast is the player running and such? Is he different in the fourth quarter than he was in the first? Who is that player specifically? Can he be anonymized, or is he identified? And of course he was identified. That sort of information sharing, when you get to that level of detail. And then when you go to the other hat that I wear at the league, is around managing our player health portfolio. Combining that with injury information gets you all sorts of insights into players. Yet at the same time, if you don't aggregate all of that information about players, the speeds they're running, the injuries they suffer, the equipment that they're wearing, the surface that they're on, the atmospheric conditions, all that kind of stuff, then you're not doing enough to actually advance player health. And so you need all the data from all of the clubs. How are they training? How fast are the players running? How much are they keeping them on field? Not to mention gameplay. There's a real thin line there, and there's nothing more competitive than a bunch of owners, general managers, and coaches in a room talking about the insights they think they can divine with all of that data versus what they think the other 31 are going to find out. So, Jim, it's a point of tension that I think has probably existed long before we collected all this data, but now is in, modern day, something that we see play out in lots and lots of different forms.
Right, and I'm glad you spoke to that deeper layer, because we have, since before I was born, it was a concern of my father and our family. I remember growing up, great Raiders Steelers battles, and being accused of pouring water on the field and icing it before championship games, things like that. The more content or substance that there is to do that, the more concern I think there is out there. So I really appreciate that. Raquel, I held your question for last because you're in the space we all want to be in. Anyone in innovation wants to launch. We want to be at that point where we're starting something new. My grandfather started the Steelers in 1933, and him and his brothers Jim and Dan went to the local bars with tickets and basically gave them out to try and fill up the stands. You've done this in a much different world. There is so much content out there. There's so many other, sources and things that we pay attention to. You've done this fantastic job where all of the expectations are that we don't want to set expectations too high before the first game, but all the expectations are that exactly, that you really have broken through. So how did you break through this world where there is so much content out there that you've created a footprint that's meaningful, in a space that is mainly one of the biggest college football towns in the country?
Yeah, good question. Not an easy answer. I would say very fortunate. I'm hearing everyone talk about their players, and we just created a team, and this is a club that has been 2 years in the making. So We had to get creative, and one, first and foremost, is what do we want our brand as a club to be? And then how do we embrace not just the city, but our fans? And if there's one thing I'm sure you guys all know about soccer, is the fans are incredibly passionate. And so I think we were very fortunate in that our fans in this city really fought hard to create a major league sports team or bring it here. And then once it was here, we've talked a lot about data and even content. We embraced it, right? So we embraced it in the sense that we weren't just focused on soccer, we were focused on what is happening in this city. How can we amplify all the other things that are happening in this city, and how can we support our fans and make them feel that they are part of this? So we brought them along for the ride. We meet with our fans every week. We actually have a practice tonight after this call. I'm going back to the stadium. And we really, we brought them in, and then we adapted to the content and the technology that's out there. We are now at a point where we do have our players and we are creating content for them. We also recognize that our fans, they are also creators, and we can't lose sight of the fact that they're creating content for our club. And so instead of coming in and shutting it down, we're saying, no, let's do that plus. And so that, I believe, has been a really, really critical factor in amplifying our club, as well as working not just in sports, but working with local artists, musicians, working with the city, also working with UT, and really saying, hey, we're here to become a cultural stakeholder with everybody else. We're not here to change the city or to be this sort of big sports team. We want to be part of what's happening here in Austin. And I think by bringing that level of authenticity to our fans and to the city, I think that's really helped us. Mind you, in a world of COVID, where we launched during COVID, the club was shut down over a year ago. We have mostly been working remote, but yet still creating a season ticket membership base, creating our supporter groups, and creating a marketing campaign that really resonates with the city, that identifies with them. And as a result, the city's really kind of welcomed us, and we're very humble for that. But I would say, I guess, high level, it is we've embraced the city. We've embraced the new technologies. We were going to have in-person happy hours. They're now on Zoom with our coaches. Our main broadcaster, Adrian Healy, he was also meant to be, with the fans. We've created a podcast for him so that fans can interact with our team and feel part of it in spite of COVID.
And look, we could all write books over the past year, but your book would be a bestseller. I mean, I am just amazed having to get games this past year with a fan base that's pretty big worldwide. What you've done in building something out of scratch is just fantastic. Is there any trend that, from the technology standpoint, that the fans drove, that you responded to, that the fans really picked up on, that became meaningful to the sort of footprint you built?
Gosh, I would say, really when it's creator content, right? They also are creating podcasts. We embrace that. We joined in with them on that. I would say that, when it comes to the things that they're doing, we joined them on calls together. I would say what we learned from them as well was, how do we keep their spirits high and passionate for the day that comes when they do enter the stadium? And so, in spite of COVID, we've created technologies around our stadium that they're still going to be able to enjoy, to get together, build that community that we've talked about through things as simple as, being, cashless and ticketless, and having the app where we've already exceeded our goal expectations for our app that they're already integrating with. We're making sure that every game that we play is on that app so that they can have access to it. They've even snuck into those games which they're not supposed to, because they're so passionate about being part of the club. But giving them content, giving them access to the content kind of behind the scenes, as some of these other panelists talked about, is something that we're continuing to build.
So I'm going to pass this question around to everyone. Jeff, I'll start with you. We have an impact in the sports world, and Dan, with what you do, even more so, I would say, on a certain level, where we touch so many lives in such a significant way. What are our responsibilities with the way we connect and engage and influence people's lives?
It's a great question. Football specifically, as a cornerstone of so many communities, I think has become more and more integrated with people in the communities in which they live. I'll give you a couple of most recent examples. Over the past, 7-8 months, our facilities in most of our towns were voting sites for the community to rally around. Right, we ran what we call NFL votes to encourage voter participation and civic engagement. Whether it be drop boxes or people waiting in line in parking lots. And then more recently, I think we're up to 20 of our 30 stadia now are COVID vaccination sites. I mean, that's something that you wouldn't have imagined a year ago, right? There was always criticism, hey, you play X number of games a year in these stadiums, they're not used for other events. But I think it's both true because they're large stadium, but also because that's the sort of the nature of the clubs and the importance of being able to share with the community what you're doing. You are a pillar of the town in which you live, and in a place where there are less and less opportunities for people to come together. It's a big advantage for football. We still drive a large audience on Sunday afternoons. People get together. So whether it be in the physical nature of the community relations and social responsibility aspect of what our clubs do in their communities, or whether it be the virtual nature of getting together for a game, I think that the importance of sports, it doesn't have to be just football, but a sports franchise in their community and integrating with it in real organic ways, probably never more important than now.
Yeah. Larry, how about you? Nike has such an influence. I'm always, proud out there with my Nike Steeler gear. But it, I know that I'm wearing something that says something to people. How does Nike look at this idea of responsibility with the way they take the athlete and then engage the community?
It's interesting. A few years back, I was in Philadelphia meeting with one of our retail partners, and we were having this conversation about, and I kind of started this conversation with him. Our brand, the Jordan brand, has a pretty incredible influence among young people all over the world, basically. And the question I posed to this guy is like, how can we use the connection that young people have to our brand? How can we use that to motivate them? Is there a way we can figure out that using that connection to our brand, our product, we can motivate them to do positive things with their life? And those guys went off and they came back with this idea that they ran by us that they called A's for J's. And basically it was, we connected with 3 high schools in Philadelphia, and kids could earn credits towards Jordan product by grades, attendance, things that, and we heard from people like, well, you shouldn't be paying kids to do what they should be doing anyway. But the reality is, it wasn't about paying them; it was about motivating them. And that program kind of evolved into something that we call Jordan Wings right now, which is a scholarship program for kids. We've got probably close to 400 kids right now through this program that we're paying a full free ride to any school that they qualify for and can go to. But to me, I think companies like ours, and I think the leagues, athletes, all feel an obligation to give back to the communities that they exist in. And I think they should have that obligation. I think, we depend on consumers, we depend on fans to support our efforts. And I think it's our responsibility to give back to that. And then, it's different ways for different organizations. We may do one thing, the NFL will do something else, MLS will do something, but it's all, what is your best way as an organization to give back and support the communities that you exist in? And I think, that's, to me, I see that as a responsibility, not as a nice to do, but it's something that we owe the communities that we exist in.
Raquel, let me go to you. I know you're early on in your tenure there. You guys are just launching, but still you've had this sort of spark effect throughout the community.
Mhm.
Where do you see this idea of responsibility in the way you are just beginning to introduce yourself and connect, particularly when it relates to innovation and technology?
Yeah, absolutely. We have very similarly embraced our responsibility, our social responsibility, especially here in Austin. An example is when COVID hit, all of our venues were shut down. And we're a big music, creative community. And so we linked arms very similarly with Black Pumas, and little did we know they'd be these Grammy nominated artists, but we worked very closely with them, and we raised money as a club, obviously all online. And the money that we raised and contributions that we gave, we administered it out to all local musicians in need. And we're continuing to work with local nonprofits in the music space, because that's one of our things that we really believe that Austin, we want to continue to cultivate that spirit of Austin. But on the sports side, we have an obligation to build a soccer community, and that starts from a very young age. And so we do have our own nonprofit arm where we work with kids across all different socioeconomic backgrounds, and we train them, and ultimately with hopes that they'll go into our academy and become, a local, player for Austin FC. That's our long-term goal. But giving back is very essential. Our mission is to be a cultural stakeholder for the community, but right behind that is to build America's next great soccer community. And we know we cannot do that without, creating the provision for those communities. So
I love this continued connection with the arts. That's really, that's really inspiring to hear that. Dan, so I go to you. You're the biggest group on the block. Now you're at AWS, which I think a lot of people don't really even know exist in many ways, but again, may touch more lives than maybe any other organization in the world. Certainly, you're helping us at the NFL drive so much of what we're doing and what we're going to continue to do going forward. How do you folks approach this idea of responsibility?
Yeah, I think there's so many vectors of responsibility and how you were thinking about whether that's civic responsibility, empowering communities, ensuring that you're giving opportunity to enterprises of any size, whether those are the largest companies in the world to, mom and pop shops. As it relates to sports, we're certainly guided by, what are those priorities and responsibilities that our partners have. I know, Jeff, you touched upon this, safety and health is another vector, right, of those that play sports at every level. And I think that if we just look at the NFL, it's a great example of, enabling a really important issue for, a league, and being able to then kind of drive, some innovation or empower where they want to take that, I think is a great opportunity and something that's advancing every day. Jeff, you had mentioned like a lot of the statistics and data, and whether that's around speed or velocity, acceleration, orientation, direction on a field, like leveraging all of that to real insights, and whether that the output of that is within equipment or data on rehabilitation and recovery, like using that to help those who provide medical and diagnostic treatment and improve the insights and treatment that they can provide is certainly something that we want to continue to drive and help with. I think that also helps drive better preventative measures and insight that can increase player safety, inform a better, faster recovery from injury. And I think that that also can be available to people even outside, right? Like to make that available to researchers, equipment manufacturers, trainers, coaches, medical professionals, being able to kind of leverage the output, the data, the insights that are generated, just I think helps create a faster and better and more robust path to ongoing improvement in safety and health of people who play sports at any and every level.
And picking up on that point, Jim, as Dan knows, we entered into a partnership with AWS a year ago now on what's called a Digital Athlete Project. And the genesis of this was obviously, we're very concerned, focused on head injury, concussion in football. And we've had a team of biomechanical engineers analyzing, I guess it's more than 800 on-field concussions.
No.
Jeff, you froze there for a second.
One thing while he unfreezes, I was just going to add, as I was listening to you, Dan, and remembering the question you had asked earlier, Jim, was technology. How have our supporters or our fans influenced technology? And one thing, it just totally popped into my head. It's so small and minor, but the QR code has become this thing where, we couldn't get merch fast enough to our fans that we literally had to create a retail mobile unit. And the only way they could access our merch was through the QR code. And so now internally it's a joke that, who knew the QR code would make a comeback? So I would say that's a big one.
Larry, you talked about people wanting to touch the product. Do you have any experience where you still have, you have the old way of touching the equipment, but maybe an innovative way of getting it out into the spaces?
Yeah, we definitely have used technology, digital technology, to enhance experiences for consumers when it comes to purchasing and acquiring product. I mean, we've done things like, an event, a group is at an event, and if you point your phone to a certain area, the shoe pops up and you can buy the shoe at that point. It's like, so just we've continued to look for different ways to make the experience for consumers even better. And the digital world has definitely helped us to be able to do that, through different experiences that we can offer, that we couldn't offer 10 years ago, that we couldn't offer 5 years ago, or a few years ago. We're continuing. There's a group in Nike that just focuses on how to make that digital buying experience better for the consumer. And again, there are different ways. Like we did an All-Star a couple years ago in LA. Travis Scott did a concert, and if you were at the concert and held your phone up and pointed it at a certain spot, you then were able to not only buy the shoes but have them delivered to you within, working with our AWS guys, making sure that the shoe was there at a certain point in time. So it's just continuing to evolve and innovate when it comes to the consumer experience is something that we continue to focus on, day in, day out.
Larry, I love that idea and that focus of that concept of I remember something like that at a Super Bowl where you did something with your phone and you got rewarded right away. So let me ask, and we're going to try and get Jeff here. So we lost Jeff on the Zoom world we all live in here, unfortunately, but we're working hard to bring him back. But so I have a question, and you guys have already felt and heard my Steeler bias here, but in 2033, the Steelers will turn 100. So let's say 12 years from now, what do you feel the one technology or tool that will have had the biggest impact on the sports industry to have been? Raquel, I'm going to start with you on that question.
Oh, okay. The biggest impact. Wow. Well, I think that, if one thing, it's a answer, non-answer. If one thing that we have learned is that through COVID is that it's really hard to predict the future. But I think that we can adapt, and I think we'll continue to adapt with the technology, because of technology, the things that are happening, that the technology and data that Dan has described and works on, I think is going to continue to help us. And I think as stadiums evolve, I think things are going to become more seamless, and a lot of things are, we have to be prepared, I believe, to live in more of an online world. And what does that look like? And how do we still continue to create connection to our fans with our players?
Dan, let me throw it to you. 12 years from now, what do you see as having really changed the sports industry in a major way?
It is hard to really just select one area, right? And especially as kind of Larry nailed this, you can't predict the unpredictable or unexpected. I think there's a couple of things that will continue to kind of persist. We're all talking about data in some way, and as you look at kind of just what's produced, like I think we're producing more of it every hour today than an entire year just 20 years ago. So like thinking through what are the applications of that so things I think about are like machine learning and artificial intelligence services backed by, really high performant and reliable computing that will continue to, I believe, like usher in additional waves of areas where you can innovate, improving insight or expanding engagement with the fans, increasing automation, saving costs too for people who leverage those types of approaches, providing a more immersive and personalized experience. Another area might just be the Internet of Things, connecting sensors around, whether that's from the field or track to deliver real-time data, whether that's again for stats, to guide in-game decision making, to help inform safety and recovery, or even just helping teams discover new ways to connect with fans. I think all of these, driving better insights through, who knows what that's the. Who knows how fans are going to experience this or want to experience it, but creating ever more visually compelling, whether that's on-screen graphics, consumption across multiple devices. There's so many things that are going to kind of continue to drive innovation within the sports world. I'm really excited to see it.
Absolutely. Jeff, so I'm showing my Steeler bias here once again. In 2033, the Steelers will turn 100. So I said, let's go 12 years out and talk about one tool that you think will have had the biggest impact on the sports industry.
Oh, that's a big question. What number Super Bowl will be that they win in 2033? 7 or 8? I lose track.
Well, hopefully we'll have won 4 or 5 in between.
There you go. I think the biggest change is sort of picking off of what Dan said. I think it's the personalization of the consumer experience. I think that you're going to see fans, whether it be in the stadium or at home, getting more and more information that they have a way to curate. Everybody's experience is going to be different because that's what people are going to expect of entertainment. Then increasingly now, right? We see so many different, feeds for our games, camera angles, data for our fantasy football fans. I'm sure legalized sports betting is going to make all of that magnified. Who it is, how it is, where it is, you're going to engage with the sport in different ways, and with whom, literally changes by the year. I can only imagine that a dozen years from now, our fans are going to be demanding that they get it how they want it, when they want it, where they want it and customize beyond that. And I think it's going to be the responsibility of the league and the sport, any sport, to find the fans where they are, because that's what we're all going to expect. I think that's the biggest change that we'll see from today. Or maybe it's not a change. Maybe it's just the maturity of that concept.
Larry, I know you've kind of went in this direction earlier, but give me your view of 12 years out.
Well, again, I go back to my comment earlier about the unexpected, but for us, I think, it's continue to innovate when it comes to product, is to continue to innovate in how we connect with consumers. And, again, if you think about 12 years ago, where were things 12 years ago? What are the differences between 12 years ago and today? There are quite a few, and I think that's going to continue to be the case. One of the things that I think for us is critical is, as these new tools and new technology and innovations become available, is how do you use them to make that connection, but to make it, and I want to use a word that Raquel used earlier, authentic. To me, that's if you have all these things at your disposal, but you're not approaching them and using them in a way that's authentic to your consumer or to your fan, then it's not going to work for you. So I think one of the keys is that we don't know what 12 years from now is going to look like, but I do think for us and for all of us, I think it's maintaining that authentic position and making sure that how we use these technologies, how we use these innovations are the right ones for our consumer and our fan base, and that we're connecting with them in the right way. But again, to me, I just look at it and say, if I think 12 years ago where we were versus today, 12 years from now, there's absolutely no telling where we may be. But I do think, like I said, we have to make sure that we're approaching it with the right perspective and maintaining a certain amount of flexibility and ability to shift and pivot when it's necessary. I mean, these are all things that I think if COVID didn't teach us anything, it definitely taught us that we have to be able to be flexible, to be, to be mobile. And again, I try to think 12 years ahead, and it's like, okay, what could happen between now and the 12 years? I think technologies will continue to evolve. I think, the digital ability to create content and do things that are connecting with fans and consumers, I think that's going to continue to evolve. And it's just a matter of, how do we utilize that technology in a way that is authentic and that resonates for our fans and consumers.
Larry, that's so good, because I don't know if it's my Irishness that I'm always afraid. It rains every day in Ireland, so I'm always afraid of some doom coming about. But what you just said and what Jeff touched on, look, I asked to do this panel because I want the students to feel good about the future. There's so many great opportunities, but I do have this concern. It sort of gets rooted in betting, but I think it gets beyond that. And the idea that when we, which we're going to be able to do very soon, bet on every single play, when we're able to monetize every microsecond of a game, do we start to really disturb the authenticity of the game itself? And so I see that as a challenge, because I think the opportunities for us to do things of that nature are going to be tremendous. But when do they start really getting in the way of the game itself, is something that I hope all of us, but also all these students that are going to have a big impact, 5, 10, 12 years from now, are also thinking about responsibility within those layers of the technology. So
when you think about the changes to all the games over, the last 12 or 13 years, you guys probably don't remember this, but I remember when the 3-point line didn't exist, in basketball, and now it's a major part of the game. And I think it's just things like that, but it's authentic to the game. It didn't take away from the game. It actually added to the game. It added a new element to the game. And I think to me, that's the kind of innovation that we'd be looking for, things that add to the game, not take away from it or take away from its authenticity, things that actually enhance the games and make them even better.
And Larry, you remember we were all saying it was a gimmick, and now it's such a great part of the strategy.
Exactly. It's the replay, another one. I mean, to me, I remember when there wasn't instant replay, and then I remember when it came and it's like, oh, that's going to kill the game. It's going to ruin the game. And it hasn't. It's actually, I think, it's still got its issues in different sports. But I think, to me, I would rather see an instant replay and get it right than a call that causes a team to lose or a game that's a bad call or something like that. So to me, these are all things that are innovations that have come over the years, but that have enhanced and added to the game. And I think that's what we want to continue to look for.
All right, so now we're going to switch to the folks, again, much smarter than me asking the question. So our first student question is from Katie Snell, University of Texas student. Katie asks, while we can't predict the future, how can we best prepare ourselves to discover and adopt new innovations and technologies? Raquel, I'm going to have you start that question.
Can you say that last part of the question again?
Yep, I'll read the whole thing.
Okay.
While we can't predict the future, how can we best prepare ourselves to discover and adopt new innovations and technologies?
For me, and I would say for the club and the success of the club is to not be afraid to continue to learn and try new things. There are platforms that I've never heard of that my team is like, we have to get on. And I'm like, what is that? And how do I do that? I just learned how to use Zoom, so I think it's never stop learning the new technologies. Continue to find those little pockets of fans that are doing things that that might seem weird. Someone told me once, if it makes you uncomfortable in the area of technology, keep going. And so it's a lesson for me, and it's been a lesson for the club. Things that we haven't done yet, but we know we need and we want to embrace for our fans. So that's what I would say.
Great answer. Dan, do you want to take a crack at this, and do you need me to read the question again?
No, I just love what Raquel said about continuously learning. I think that's that learning, ongoing learning, and being curious, like always seeking not just to kind of improve your own knowledge, but really being curious about new possibilities that may or may not exist, going out and exploring them, trying to really think through like the applications of them, and above all, just follow the passion, like what is driving you and excites you, and whether that's as a fan or someone who is wants to take on new skills or make a change in the world, that continuous learning curiosity is going to serve you well. And I'll just add to that, like thinking really big, right? Create, and don't be afraid to create a bold direction that that inspires the results that you want to see. Look around corners, think through different ways of how you can delight kind of the end consumer. I think those are the kind of guiding principles, and not being constrained by what exists today. How can you solve this problem? Challenging yourself to think big. I think that's always going to serve you well, as as you think through, like really just how to create innovation, what tools to adopt, where to guide kind of your knowledge and learning.
Yep, great. Jeff, the next question is pretty much specifically to you, although I guess I could chime in, but you're smarter than me, so I'll let you take the heat on this one. How integrated will the NFL be with sports gambling 10 years from now?
It's a tough question, right? It's a shifting landscape, and one that there aren't necessarily strict rules of the road on, at least not on the federal level. Every state has its own. But the league will obviously have to engage with legalized sports betting, which is, something that we fought for a long time. But now that it exists, it's a part of our culture, and we look at it as a fan engagement tool, just much like we did with fantasy football when that came on. You have to embrace the change and find ways to work with our fans. It was a topic of discussion with our broadcast partners. We recently signed extensions on our media deals with Amazon, CBS, NBC, Fox, others. And all of them were interested in how that data could be used for consumer engagement, as are we. I think that there's probably a couple of primary ways if we can ensure the integrity of what we're doing, because once, Jim, you references, once people start to look at your game as a series of bets as opposed to a incredibly skillful competition among some of the finest athletes in the world, you've probably lost something that you can't recover. And one way to ensure that that happens is I think to have data out there, or people rely on data that's not good data. And so if we can ensure the integrity of it by our feeds, our data that's therefore used, in sports books or whatever, so that people can come to rely on the bets that they make, I think that's one step that ensures the integrity. Another, and I think you'll see more of this in the coming, year, are the integration of sponsors and advertisers, and the integration of that on our broadcasts and on our digital streams. You'll see that show up. So I think because it's such a strong fan engagement tool, you're not going to be able to get away from it. But the tension that you're going to walk is between the integrity that you want to ensure you have, the reliance that your consumers or fans can have on the data they get, and on the risk that your game becomes something that it's not. And so I think we think about that. We've been slower to gambling than other sports have, and I think because we think about it through that lens.
Well, so, and Jeff, that's fantastic and very insightful. For true transparency, my grandfather, who started the team, the Maras, the Bidwells, and the McCaskies, we were all grandfathered because we owned horse race tracks before we owned football teams, and this is back in the 1920s. And there was always this battle about ownership between family members and all these different challenges that we went through for years. And now, I think the biggest sponsorship the Steelers signed this offseason was with BetMGM.com, and all over Western Pennsylvania, you see the MGM's lion logo and the Steeler symbol, and that was certainly many years where any idea where that even might exist, was forbidden. So, but Jeff, thank you for that. Let me get some more really good questions. So Larry, let me start with you on this one. How have you addressed the growing desire for fans to interact? Wow, that's another betting one. Sorry about that. 3 on betting there. That's 6. Sorry, I'm getting caught up. I'm getting the Zoom. Using all these technologies is slowing me down. Larry, a couple of weeks ago, the Times ran a piece that focused on soccer's foray into sportswear. Obviously, the Jordan brand has been a key part through this collaboration with the Paris Saint-Germain. But the article profiled other clubs like Arsenal, Inter Milan. If others enter this space and it becomes more saturated, how does a company like Nike and the Jordan brand work with club partners to stay ahead of this curve?
Well, I think reality is for football, soccer, Jordan, we're kind of late to the game. I mean, Nike, Adidas, all these other brands have been in soccer, and for Jordan, it was something that just happened with us with PSG. That was our first foray into soccer, and it's been extremely successful for us. And I think the way we've approached the connection with them is, we're on the soccer pitch, but it's also about lifestyle. It's about the lifestyle of soccer or football. It's how do we plug into and tie into the lifestyle of football, and that means you know, our products are not just for on the soccer pitch, but they're for what you wear to the game, or what the fans will wear, or what the players wear off the pitch. And so our focus in soccer has been not just about the game. It is about the game, but it's about the lifestyle that goes on around the game. And that's the way we've approached basketball. That's the way we approach football. That's the way we approach all of the sports. It's really, the sport is at the center of it, but it's the lifestyle around that sport and the lifestyle that that sport creates and generates. That's really what we look to get involved in from a Jordan Brand perspective. So again, for us, we're kind of late to the game of soccer, but we're taking a little bit of a different approach to it. And I think you know, to me, in the U.S. maybe the game needs some help, but outside of the U.S., the game is strong outside of the U.S. And I think you know, to me, the more we can do with like the PSGs of the world, then the more I think that can expand and broaden the game. Because if we can get people interested in the lifestyle of the sport, then to me, that leads them to the sport as well. And vice versa, if they're interested in the sport, then we can lead them into the lifestyle around the sport.
So Larry, does that have a downside? You know, I know there's a group of Steeler fans that love sort of everything we try to do, but there's a group that you know, they want Franco, they want Jack Lambert, they want Joe Green. You know, they want us to do what we did back in the 70s and make no changes, and they wear jerseys. You know, they like the Nike symbol on the side of the jersey, but that's all they're going to wear. You know, how do you approach those level of fans?
So to me, I mean, you're exactly right. There, we do have to make sure that again, we're not losing the fans that we already have, or the consumers that we already have, and that we're adding new consumers and new fans. And I think that there's a delicate balance to that. There are certain things that we'll look at and say, you know what, we probably shouldn't do this because it's going to have too much of a negative effect on an existing consumer base, or, you know, in this consumer group. And then there are other times that it's like, okay, you know what, this makes sense, we're going to do it. It might ruffle some feathers over here, but it's worth it for us to move forward and do this. But we do have to take that into consideration as we're developing product, as we're connecting with, you know, different sports and sport teams and things like that. We do have to consider that, you know, how does this going to impact our current consumer base? But to me, if you're not willing to push the envelope a little bit, then you're not going to, you know, you're not going to grow. You'll maintain that base, but you're not going to grow.
Yeah, no question. Thanks for answering that, because I thought it was a little bit of a perspective, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. You folks have been amazing with the path that you've taken. So obviously it's been the right one. But you know, I run into some of those old curmudgeons, and I always wonder how how a group like yours looks at them. So the next question, Raquel, Jeff, let me throw it to you folks. Raquel, we'll go with you first. You know, the NBA made this big investment with Top Shot, the NFTs. Are there any plans for these online collectibles? Are you folks using them at Austin FC? Do you want to talk a little bit about where you think that's going from a team standpoint, Raquel?
Well, very progressive question. We have not yet had those conversations, specifically as it relates to the club. We've started to talk internally, you know, what does this mean, and how do we embrace it in a way that you know, means something to the fans and is, you know, part of the sort of moment that everyone's having around NFTs. So I wish I could say we were as progressive as having already gone that extra mile, but we have not yet. So more to come on Austin FC.
Neither of the Steelers, so you're all right. I think. Jeff, do you want to talk about this online assets, collectibles, whatever they ultimately end up being? You know, how is the NFL exploring them, and you know, what do you think about the path forward with those things, or are they a fad? Are we going to be over them in 3 years?
I'm not wagering on what's a fad and what's not a fad. I'd lose that bet every time. But I think Raquel will be pleased to know I think we're in the same place that she is. Certainly individual players have explored it as is they're right. There's not a league-wide or club-wide strategy at this point around this. I think it's too new. Obviously, protection will matter, and understanding the blockchain environment, how NFTs work, and all that kind of stuff is not something you can do overnight. So I think probably watch this space. We do have internal working groups on it, spending time thinking about it, but have not, look, it took us forever to figure out legalized sports betting. So you're trying to figure out, figure this out overnight. Jim, you're expecting too much.
I know.
That's why we have you there, not me, Jeff.
It's also something that we're looking at and trying to figure out how it's going to work and affect us as well. Because people collect shoes, they collect images of our athletes. I mean, all these things, and we're not sure yet exactly where we fit into that, but we're working on it, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dan, let me go to, there's a question out here from a student, Ryan Kim. Have you experienced a downside from the data-driven approach in your field? Is there something that you think there's too much data and it's getting in the way? I know that's an odd question for AWS, but do you have any experience where you're flooding people out and not building the relationships with the customers you might want? I think that's Ryan's question.
Yeah, and I think it's an astute one. There's always a danger of just like, there's so much data that you really just don't know what are, separating kind of the signal from noise, and really understanding what is the right data to focus on, I think is going to be an ongoing challenge. I think some of the applications that we talked about in terms of, machine learning, training models, and having kind of human intervention with that as well, people who really understand the consumers, the fans, the customers, being able to kind of meld both of those will keep you on the right track. And I think knowing your customer, it will also help, really engaging, not just what they're asking for, but thinking through what are the contexts that they have, what are the different segmentations that they might be interested in, like thinking through that and being able to apply it in the right way, I think is going to be a challenge, but also the biggest opportunity in leveraging just this massive amounts of data that we'll continue to to have access and use.
So tomorrow we have a fantastic panel on diversity, really good group of folks. I can't wait to hear them. But we all know that just as we've had some struggles in the sports industry, the tech sector, data, et cetera, the folks that are driving the development of data and these tools, have struggled to really have diverse workforces. Can each of you sort of address diversity and its relationship to innovation and where there might be opportunities and where there might be challenges that we need to be looking at in a deeper way? Jeff, I'll start with you since.
Incredibly important topic, and I think it affects all levels of our business, and we grapple with it, very publicly. And Jim, why don't you do the kickoff on the history here as opposed to me do it? It's better coming from you, I think.
Well, I mean, it's certainly, we all know the history and the major gap that we faced, and my father, I'm certainly proud that he took a step, and the experience really came from, well, hopefully a lot of experiences and a lot of insight in his life, but one that was clear. Tony Dungy was a player and then an assistant coach for the Steelers, and he was the youngest and first African-American defensive coordinator in NFL history. And my father saw him not getting interview opportunities, and then getting interviews and not getting the jobs, and knowing that he was a better candidate than so many of the folks that were getting jobs, and got to see that experience of that humiliation that Tony was suffering. And it was, I mean, Tony can talk about it, and it's a really impactful story to hear Tony tell it. But one thing I'm proud that my father did was take some responsibility for that, and to begin to address it with what we now call the Rooney Rule, which is the diverse candidate slate, that the NFL, we did a tremendous job kicking it off. We've certainly had some challenges over the last 5 years, but I think we did some things over the last year and a half that I am hopeful will make a change. We'll see. So there's a little bit of a quick background on the subject matter. Larry, do you want to talk a little bit about what you've seen in Nike and both the tremendous relationship and equity you have built throughout the entire world, but particularly in the African American community, and then where having that great presence, do you still find challenges inside of the organization in terms of leadership roles and hiring, promotion, et cetera?
Absolutely. I think Nike's made a considerable amount of progress over the years. I was the first African American vice president at Nike in history of Nike when I started there in 1997. And it was a surprise to me when I started there, because when you look at the athletes that Nike works with, the commercials, all the things, it would lend you to think that there would be more of a representation in the corporate office, and there was not. It has improved significantly, but the reality is, and we all acknowledge this, Nike still has work to do when it comes to diversity, when it comes to making sure that people are getting fair opportunities for jobs and experiences. It's still something that we're working through and focused on. And I think, like I said, we've made some significant improvements, but we still have a ways to go before I think our organization represents our consumer base. I think that's where I would, when you look at our consumer base and you look at our internal organization, there's definitely a disconnect there, and we are focused on closing that gap for sure.
And Dan, going back to STEM, in racial minority communities, to coding, folks getting degrees in coding, software development, the challenge is very apparent in the tech sector. I know there's been some strong initiatives, and there's been some criticism for you folks. You want to talk a little bit about how you're viewing it, and maybe some of the things you're trying to do to make some changes?
Sure. Yeah, it's undeniable how important inclusion, diversity, and equity are. There's just proven, even science that having a diverse set of opinions and perspectives just helps drive better decisions at the end of the day. And to what Larry says, you have to be committed to having a really diverse workforce, because it allows you to, drive that innovation for your customers who are global and diverse. And at the end of the day, it's just the right thing to do. For your customers, for your employees. Amazon within the tech space is no different from any other company. We have a lot of challenges. This has been a space that has had a lot of challenges, but I know that just in a lot of the things that we're doing, both internally and in partnership with, the communities and other leaders and organizations in the field to, help promote coding in underrepresented communities, to give people those opportunities to start early. There's a long way to go. I'm really encouraged by just more and more what I'm seeing us do in that space.
Absolutely. Raquel, I'm going to combine this with another question. So a student named Grace, I only have her first name, said, so take the question I just asked, as well as what advice do you have for young women pursuing high roles in the sports industry, such as a lead management role?
Oh, okay. I'll answer the first one. I started my career in multicultural advertising. So this has always been the topic for me in marketing and advertising on big brands, from AT&T to Pepsi, so different brands. And what I found was they knew it was the right thing to do when it came to diversity, but when it came down to budgets from a marketing standpoint, that was always the first thing to get cut. So seeing the evolution, I think it's evolved in a good way. But what I would say is now that I've gone from multicultural to working for a relatively big brand in this market, it is a little bit different in that, you're there to build a team. And what I can say about Austin FC is that it has started from the top. Racial equity is very important to us. It drives everything that we do for hiring decisions. We don't have a Rooney rule, but it may as well be the equivalent at Austin FC in that we make sure that a diverse group of candidates are vetted in an equal playing field. And I'm a product of that, being a Hispanic, now vice president of marketing. So I think for diversity and organizations, I think it's really on the staff, if they aren't already doing it, to continue to ask the questions of your leaders for that social responsibility of diversity and inclusion. So that would be kind of my note there. In terms of aspiring to go into the sports field, I would say there's probably a bigger gap there when it comes to the cutoff, if you will. And I think it all comes down to, hard work and passion. If you really love the game and you really love your profession and what you want to do, continue to cultivate that. And I think, at least for me, the right doors will eventually open. Just don't give up.
That's fantastic. I have spent the year doing a lot of speaking to student groups via Zoom, and the question has come up in almost every conversation about women being coaches in professional sports or major college sports. And so I'm going to do the worst thing you can do in an academic environment. I'm going to quote a study that I don't have right in front of me, but it basically said that there are 5 top qualities that good coaches have, and it was organization, information delivery, training. Now I'm forgetting one of them, but inspiration was the 4th of the 5. Yep. And in the other one, I can apologize, women outscored men in such a significant rate. So I have come to believe that I really think, knowing the competitive nature of sports, I think we're going to have a female head coach, in the National Football League, in the NBA, and all of the major sports leagues. I think we're going to have multiple in the next 10 to 15 years. So that's one prediction I'll share that I think is positive, and I think we're moving that direction quickly. So let me turn to sort of a final question here, which we've all touched on in some ways, but let me use that Steeler marker of 100 seasons again. And so 12 years from now, what do you think a key skill or tool that a student themselves should develop so that they are successful in the industry? And Dan, I'll start with you, since I started with you the first question. You'll get to be the jump in here and go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think we touched upon, there are so many tools and different technologies that exist and that will come out, different platforms, different things that you can use. I'll just go back to what I said. I think the 3 biggest things you can have, are that passion and desire, that ability to learn and really be curious, and explore all of the edges of, your passion, and think big.
Jeff?
You ask all the easy questions here, Jim. That one advantage to sports, and I imagine this is true for other big brands too, but I know that it's certainly true for sports, is that you have the benefit of being able to reach out to pretty much anybody, any expert in any walk of life, and they will actually return your phone call. I don't know why they do, but they do.
That's true.
And if I want to reach out to, the world's greatest neuroscientist, and I have, that person actually spends the time to get back to me, regardless of how stupid my question might be. And I think that translates a little bit to the answer to the question, which is to say to the group that's out there, when you are in sports, I think that it's an underleveraged opportunity to take advantage of your own curiosity. You don't have to have all the answers. All you have to do is be paying attention and ask a few questions, and then find out who can help you. It happened with us with AWS as it relates to a project that I was talking about before I got cut off on my Zoom. But it's nevertheless true. You take advantage of the platform that you're given. You didn't build it, but it's there. And the way to build it further is to rely upon people who are smarter than you in specific areas of life, and just be curious enough and diligent enough to find out the answers to the questions, and then appropriate them as your own, and pretend as if you know more than you do. Now, you can leave the last part out, but it's the curiosity thing. And I think that's true 12 years from now. It's just like it was true 100 years ago. But the key part here is take advantage of the situation you're in when you're in sports, because a lot of people want to help you and a lot of people want to be associated with you. So you'd be silly to let that opportunity bypass.
Fantastic perspective. Larry, what do you see as something students will need to have 12 years down the road?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said by both Dan and Jeff. The thing that I would add is I think you have to be willing to take calculated risk. I think, to me, being willing to step out of your comfort zone sometime and take a risk on something, but do your homework, make sure it's not a crazy risk, but that it's a calculated risk. But I think being willing to sometimes step out of your comfort zone that's when you really learn. That's when you really grow. I think when you step out and be willing to take risks. We were talking to somebody we were doing a piece on Michael Jordan once, and we were talking to different people about him, and a player named BJ Armstrong. We talked to BJ, and a comment he made stuck with me. He said, Michael Jordan never lost a game. He either won or he learned. And to me, that's really what it's about. It's like you take a risk, you try something. If it doesn't work, if you learn from it, then you didn't lose. And I think, being willing to take those risks, being willing to step out and try things, step out of your comfort zone, push the envelope. Those are things that I think lead to success, lead to bigger levels of success. I think, if you stay in your comfort zone and continue to do the things that, that are within your comfort zone, I think you don't really grow. You don't really take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there for you. So I would just say, be willing to take those calculated risks and step out of your comfort zone.
Fantastic. Raquel, do you want to finish us off here?
I'm going to build on what Larry said and tag the end of it. If there's anything that I've learned through Austin FC and starting the club, we consider ourselves a startup, is that the ability to recover quickly. Things aren't going to go great. Things are going to change, whether it's big or small. And every day, sometimes every hour, we're like, okay, cannot dwell on what just happened. We have to recover and we have to keep moving. And I think that that has served, that's been part of the success of Austin FC, is we don't sit, we don't just hold on to maybe what coulda, shoulda, woulda. We say, okay, that didn't work. Next, we recover quickly. And I think we all hold that sort of personal mantra. And so for anyone wanting to go into sports, as I have learned, it's, come in willing to take those risks, learn to build that skin and recover quickly, and you're going to be great.
Beautiful. I want to thank each of you. It's certainly been a joy for me, but I again want to go back to that story I told a second ago. I spent so much of this past year. I think I talked to close to 100 student groups and thousands of students. And, so all year, and I wish we could have done this tonight, but this was the better, I guess, format for getting our voices together the way we did. But I would see on the other side of my screen, dozens and dozens of students. And this was an extremely challenging year for them, as we all know, but the challenges we all faced in being on the cusp of what's next in our life. And the contribution that each of you have made to them tonight, I know, having spent a year getting that feedback, watching those faces, their interest in really trying to make this industry better and be better people in doing it. So I really can't thank you enough for that, and just so grateful. So Raquel, Larry, Dan, Jeff, grateful for the time. Appreciate it. I think Tolga's going to get back on here and give folks instruction for the rest of the night. But thank you all, and appreciate everyone who joined it.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you again to Jim and the entire panel and all of our panelists tonight. This was just so amazing. When Jim and I began to cook this plan up 6-7 months ago, I don't think we had no idea how big this would get and how great it would be. So I really, again, want to thank everyone, Larry, Jeff, Dan, Raquel, for joining us. Really an awesome experience. And folks, I also want to say thank you. We got so many good questions that we couldn't get to them all tonight. So we've made a point to save those. And hopefully if these folks let us pester them just a little bit more in the coming weeks or months, we might be able to get some more answers and share those via email. No pressure, we'll see. They've already been more than generous with their time. And I'm just going to share here. So we'll take a break on tomorrow. We'll let everyone kind of catch their breath. I hope you can see that. We'll come back Thursday and we're going to finish strong as we play along, as we say. So we've got a panel on diversity in the sports industry, a really amazing group there, as you can see. And then we will round it out with culture and ethics in the sports workplace. A couple of topics I like to think of as simple, but not easy. And so we hope to see you again on Thursday night as we finish out the symposium. So thanks again to all the panelists, our moderators, and of course, most of all to you attendees for taking the time to join us. So have a great rest of the night. Have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you Thursday to bring this thing home. Take care.
Thank you.